Screaming traders, plunging red graphs, locked ATM doors during the 2008 and 2023 bank runs. Panic is loud, but true power is absolutely silent. We cut from the chaos of crashing markets to a slow, sweeping drone shot over a tranquil, brutalist cylindrical tower in Basel, Switzerland. No glowing signs, no corporate logos. Just a concrete monolith sitting quietly by the Rhine. While the rest of the world burns, this building remains perfectly calm, methodically processing the global panic. You have been programmed to believe that economics is a force of nature. Every time inflation eats your grocery budget, or a mortgage rate spike threatens your home, you are told it is an unfortunate accident of the market. You were wrong. This is the ultimate misconception. Your financial suffering is the precise mathematical output of a formula decided in a room you are legally forbidden from entering by a committee you never elected. Your wallet is actively being drained by a bureaucratic ghost. The official narrative is a myth designed to keep you looking in the wrong direction. We are going to completely bypass the distracting political theater of Washington and the noisy trading floors of Wall Street. I'm going to teach you how to read the actual, unredacted source code of the global economy. We will prove that money is not wealth. Money is a highly calibrated control mechanism orchestrated from within this very tower by an entity known as the Bank for International Settlements. It is 3 a.m. in a cluttered academic office in Chicago. The room is bathed in the harsh blue light of 6 monitors displaying cascading Bloomberg terminal data. The forensic macroeconomist is not looking at stock tips. He is tracking an anomaly. A wire transfer of billions of dollars is moving across the global ledger, leaving a clear digital paper trail. But the exact moment those funds cross into a specific Swiss jurisdiction, the data simply vanishes. The screen does not show a routing error or a server timeout. It flashes a cold, hard protocol. Access denied, sovereign entity. The macroeconomist leans in, his sardonic amusement mixing with the pure thrill of untangling a deliberately obfuscated system. In an era where open-source intelligence and blockchain analytics can track a stolen $10 crypto fraction across the dark web, a multi-billion-dollar transaction has just evaporated into thin air. This is the paradox that shatters everything you learned in Macroeconomics 101. We are taught that capital flows are monitored, taxed, and regulated by sovereign nations. Yet here is a black hole sitting right in the middle of Europe, casually swallowing the gross domestic product of a small island nation without triggering a single regulatory alarm. The investigator is staring at a mathematical impossibility, a corpse with no fingerprints. To understand this glitch in the matrix, you have to look past modern finance and dig into the archival bedrock. The Bank for International Settlements is not a startup or a modern shadow bank. It was founded in 1930. That makes it the world's oldest international financial institution, predating the United Nations, the World Bank, and the International Monetary Fund. It is the grandfather of the entire modern fiat architecture. But age alone does not explain the missing billions. The true anomaly lies in its legal armor. The bank operates under a completely unique, almost medieval legal status: absolute sovereign immunity. The building in Basel is not technically on Swiss soil in any meaningful legal sense. It is an independent state of finance. Swiss police and government officials cannot even enter the premises without express written permission from the bank's own management. Think about the sheer arrogance of that protocol. If a violent crime were committed in the lobby, local law enforcement would have to wait outside the glass doors, hoping the bankers graciously invite them in. The macroeconomist runs the legal statutes through his terminal, confirming the impossible. The people controlling the levers of global liquidity are entirely insulated from the laws that govern the very citizens forced to use their currency. And the legal force field extends far beyond physical geography. The institution pays absolutely no taxes on its massive, continuous transactions. While you are audited over a miscalculated deduction, the Bank for International Settlements moves trillions with zero fiscal liability. Furthermore, every single piece of its internal correspondence, every memo, and every algorithmic directive is legally protected from any search or seizure by any global law enforcement agency. The evidence is all right there on the illuminated screens, hiding in plain sight. We are not talking about a shadowy cabal meeting in a smoky basement. We are looking at regulatory arbitrage codified into international law. The macroeconomist traces the empty space where the money used to be. The transaction did not fail. It was simply elevated to a tier of reality where our laws no longer apply. A tier designed to be permanently opaque. You begin to realize that the statistics they feed you on the evening news are a carefully constructed illusion. Central banks, the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, these are just the middle managers facing the public. The true core of the system, the actual prime mover of the global economy, requires absolute darkness to operate. Transparency is lethal to the kind of power that issues currency out of thin air. Our forensic investigator leans back in his chair, the blue light reflecting off his glasses. He has found the perimeter of the fortress, but the walls are infinitely high. The entire global financial system is built on an architecture of trust. Yet the architect itself is legally completely unaccountable. It is the perfect crime, sanctioned by the very governments it subtly commands. The ultimate financial black box. Every dollar, every euro, every yen eventually answers to the protocols drafted inside this concrete cylinder. They have built an impenetrable silo right in the heart of Europe, where the master ledger of human labor and debt is balanced, adjusted, and manipulated. The question is no longer where the money went. The question is how a single bureaucratic institution managed to convince the entire world to surrender its financial sovereignty. The macroeconomist closes the terminal window, the vanished data now officially and permanently untraceable. We are left staring at the ultimate, counterintuitive truth of the modern financial world. How do you hide $1 trillion in plain sight, away from the prying eyes of tax authorities, investigative journalists, and sovereign governments? It is brutally, brilliantly simple. You just give the vault diplomatic immunity. To grant a bank diplomatic immunity, you need a founding charter so deeply embedded in international law that no modern court can touch it. Deep inside a subterranean, climate-controlled server farm in Geneva, our financial data archivist traces the ghost of that vanishing money back to its source code. Dust motes float in a shaft of cold light, projecting an old, typed treaty directly beside the modern, rapidly scrolling ledger hashes of high-frequency trades. The archivist isolates the root directory of this financial leviathan. You have been taught that the modern economic order was born from Silicon Valley algorithms and digital globalization. This is a profound misconception. To understand the true architecture of your digital dollar, you have to look past the server racks and read the faded ink of a drastically different century. The anomaly staring back from the screen is the date of inception. The official narrative is a myth of progressive financial evolution. The chilling reality is that the institution currently managing the frictionless transfer of your digital wealth was forged in the fires of geopolitical catastrophe. The bank that coordinates your daily economic reality today was explicitly built to handle the catastrophic fallout of Weimar hyperinflation and later the processing of Nazi gold. We pulled the foundational document from the digital archive. The year is 1930. The world is teetering on the edge of the Great Depression, and the bleeding nations of Europe are desperate for a mechanism to extract wealth from a defeated enemy. They needed a neutral ground, a financial vacuum operating entirely outside the jurisdiction of any single sovereign state, a place where the rules of normal society simply did not apply. The archivist highlights the legal cornerstone, the Young Plan. This institution was originally created as a temporary utility, designed specifically to facilitate the processing of German World War I reparations. It was supposed to be a bureaucratic clearinghouse, moving defeated wealth across borders without triggering local taxation or legal seizure. They built a temporary bypass valve, completely unaware they were laying the foundation for an empire. The server farm hums in the background, perfectly regulating the temperature, as the archivist pulls up the records from the next decade. The typed treaties on the projection crossfade into a darker era. The anomaly of this institution is not that it was created, but that it refused to die when its original purpose evaporated. Instead, it adapted. When the Second World War erupted, the bank found a new, highly lucrative application for its sovereign immunity. The logic of the detective requires us to follow the money, even when it crosses enemy lines. While the rest of the globe was locked in total, devastating conflict, the lights in the cylindrical tower in Switzerland remained on. You assume war severs all ties, but capitalism requires a ledger that never sleeps. The archivist's screen fills with transaction logs from the darkest years of the 20th century, detailing an entirely different kind of neutrality. Because of its impenetrable legal shield, the bank controversially processed plundered assets right through the carnage of the Second World War. It functioned as an untouchable financial bridge between warring nations, settling accounts while cities burned. The ledgers coldly document the processing of wealth looted by the Third Reich, proving that at the highest levels of global finance, there are no enemies, only counterparties and clearing accounts. This is the intellectual horror of absolute mathematical detachment. You are programmed to believe that institutions have a moral compass, but the archivist sees only raw, unfiltered data. The bank was not ideologically aligned with fascism or democracy. It was aligned exclusively with the flow of capital. Its diplomatic immunity allowed it to wash the blood off the gold before it re-entered the global system. It is a machine executing an amoral algorithm. The war eventually ends, and the victorious powers immediately turn their attention to the architects of the conflict. The world demands a reckoning, not just for the generals, but for the financiers who enabled the slaughter. The archivist opens the heavily redacted transcripts of the 1944 Bretton Woods Conference. The Allied nations are restructuring the global economy, and the supreme financial anomaly in Switzerland is placed squarely in the crosshairs. At Bretton Woods, the United States aggressively pushed to dissolve the institution permanently, citing its undeniable and deeply controversial wartime actions. It should have been the end of the line. The bank was a relic of a failed era, caught red-handed processing stolen gold. But it survived the execution order. The initiative was quietly suffocated because global central bankers intervened to protect their own exclusive, untouchable network from being dismantled. The archivist leans back, the blue glow of the monitors reflecting a cynical truth. If you want to understand who truly holds power on this planet, look at who can veto the United States government at the peak of its historical dominance. The survival of the bank proved that the brotherhood of central banking supersedes national sovereignty. They saved their sanctuary, ensuring that the ultimate financial black box would outlive the very nations that tried to destroy it. The scrolling ledger hashes on the monitors continue to cascade, representing the trillions of dollars flowing through that exact same legal architecture today. The system was never reformed. It was merely upgraded to handle fiber optic speeds. If they could maintain their absolute sovereignty against the Allied powers in 1944, you must accept a terrifying reality. Your modern elected officials have absolutely no authority to stop what they are building next. They survived Bretton Woods by hiding in plain sight. They mutated from a post-war relic into the architects of the global financial matrix. I stand in this starkly lit room, holding a solid wooden block above a fragile glass table. This block represents the absolute foundation of your financial security. You were taught that your money sits safely in a vault, guarded by heavy steel doors and federal promises. But that official narrative is a comforting mathematical myth. The paradox of modern wealth is that the vault is almost entirely empty. Why doesn't your local bank actually keep your hard-earned salary on reserve? Because a highly secretive committee, operating with total diplomatic immunity inside that brutalist tower in Switzerland, decided they simply do not have to. I drop the first heavy wooden block onto the glass. It clatters loudly, echoing the terrifying reality of what we call the fractional reserve system. You were programmed to believe a deposit is a legally binding storage contract. You hand them cash, and they lock it away. You are completely wrong. The moment your paycheck clears, it legally ceases to be your property. It becomes an unsecured loan to the bank itself. This is not a glitch in the financial matrix. It is the fundamental design. But how do you prevent a global panic if everyone realizes the vaults are bare? You invent a new set of rules to mask the deficit. The architects in Basel needed a crisis to legitimize their transition from post-war administrators to global rulemakers. The catalyst arrived violently in 1974. The Herstatt Bank in Germany collapsed midday, leaving New York counterparties staring at catastrophic, unrecoverable losses. The international settlement system simply froze. It was a terrifying preview of absolute financial contagion, and the shadow Fed in Switzerland immediately seized the opportunity. Out of the ashes of that chaotic collapse, the Basel Committee on Banking Supervision was rapidly formed deep within the institution. They presented themselves as the saviors of global stability, drafting the ultimate playbook for financial risk management. But look closer at the evidence. They did not eliminate the risk of catastrophic failure. They simply standardized it. I stack another heavy wooden block on the glass table, building a precarious, metaphorical tower of debt. Each block I place represents the leveraged bets your local bank is making with your deposits right now. They are gambling on sovereign bonds, highly complex derivatives, and volatile corporate debt. The entire structure teeters, defying economic gravity. To the uninitiated observer, it looks like reckless insanity. But the syndicate in Switzerland calls it efficient capital allocation. They wrote a highly complex global treaty to dictate exactly how unstable this tower is allowed to be. You might assume that a regulatory body with supreme authority would demand a fortress of absolute solvency. You would expect a massive safety net. Instead, they engineered a masterpiece of regulatory arbitrage. Through successive iterations, currently known as the Basel III regulations, these unelected bureaucrats handed down a universal mandate. They dictated a specific mathematical threshold that every major commercial bank on the planet must legally obey to remain operational. Under these globally enforced regulations, your bank is mandated to hold a minimum capital adequacy ratio of exactly 8%. Let that precise figure sink into your rational mind. 8%. I drop another massive wooden block onto the fragile glass surface, and a microscopic hairline fracture silently spreads across the pane. This is the legally sanctioned threshold between systemic financial stability and total, cascading economic ruin. It is a brilliant, counterintuitive statistical lie. The media praises this 8% buffer as a rigorous stress test, a shield against the next Great Depression. But flip the equation, and the psychological horror of the system is exposed. If the law requires them to keep only 8% of their risk-weighted assets safe, it explicitly authorizes them to gamble away the rest. The official narrative of banking security is mathematically bankrupt. Mathematically, this means up to 92% of the money you think is sitting securely in your checking account does not physically exist. It is an algorithmic ghost. It has been transformed into a series of digital pulses, loaned out to generate massive yield for the bank's shareholders, while you receive pennies in interest. Your entire life savings is out there, right now, spinning in the roulette wheel of the global debt markets, completely beyond your control. This is the ultimate heist, perfectly executed in plain sight. They did not steal your money. They simply redefined what money is through bureaucratic consensus. The capital requirements dictated by Basel are not a safety net for the working class. They are legally binding gambling limits for the apex predators of Wall Street. And because this mandate comes from a sovereign entity in Switzerland, no domestic politician can audit the math or challenge the risk model. I place one final heavy wooden block onto the towering, unstable structure. The structural integrity of the glass table finally gives way. With a sharp, violent crack, the pane shatters, and the entire leveraged tower collapses into a chaotic pile of debris. This is what a localized bank run looks like when the 8% illusion evaporates. But the syndicate in the brutalist tower is insulated from the fallout. They do not face the consequences of the fragility they engineered. When the systemic collapse inevitably occurs, the working class is forced to absorb the catastrophic losses through bailouts and brutal inflation. But a much darker question remains hidden in the archive. If the fractional reserve system is this mathematically fragile, what happens when the central banks themselves face insolvency? When the ultimate architects of the global ledger start bleeding trillions, who exactly possesses the capital to bail out the masters of the matrix? The answer to that question is not found in a textbook. It is written in the raw data of high-frequency trading algorithms. I am watching the market matrix rendered as a glowing digital neural network on my monitors. The 8% threshold we discussed is a fragile glass floor. Right now, on this screen, that floor is shattering. Red nodes pulse violently across the global grid as a cascade of automated sell-offs triggers a mathematical panic. The official narrative tells you free markets self-correct. That is a comforting myth for undergraduates. Watch the anomaly happen in real time. As the algorithm goes into cardiac arrest, a massive, undocumented injection of capital hits the market. instantly smoothing out the catastrophic drop. The nodes turn a tranquil blue. The bleeding stops, but the math does not add up. When commercial banks fail, your government bails them out with your tax dollars. It is a brutal, familiar cycle. But a paradox emerges when you follow the money upward. When a global market crashes and central banks themselves run out of ammunition, who exactly bails out the central banks? The textbooks claim that central banks act independently to protect their national economies. That is the first misconception I need to systematically dismantle for you. Look at the data spikes from the 2008 financial crisis, and again during the unprecedented panic of 2020. In both instances, the entire global financial architecture was hours away from absolute paralysis. Cash evaporated, credit froze. The traditional levers of domestic monetary policy were completely useless. Yet the system miraculously survived. How? Because behind the closed doors of the Bank for International Settlements, an entirely different set of protocols was activated. The institution facilitated massive, unpublicized liquidity swap lines between the world's major central banks. These were not loans debated in Congress or Parliament. They were instantaneous, off-the-books currency exchanges coordinated through the Basel Syndicate to flood the dying system with synthetic oxygen. They bypassed democratic oversight entirely. This is the ultimate regulatory arbitrage. While you endure rigorous audits for a basic mortgage, the masters of the global ledger swap trillions in the shadows. These swap lines function as a dark pool of liquidity for the sovereign elite. They constructed an exclusive safety net, immunizing themselves against the volatility they engineered. The risk is socialized down to your grocery bill, while the absolute power to print the remedy remains concentrated in a single, sovereign room in Switzerland. But the arrogance of this algorithmic consensus has a fatal flaw. They built a machine so complex that even its creators have lost track of the variables. I pull up a forensic audit published in 2022, shifting the monitors to analyze the global foreign exchange markets. The data reveals an anomaly so massive, it defies conventional economic physics. It is a financial black hole, swallowing capital without leaving a trace on any official balance sheet. The official statistics you see on the evening news are a carefully curated illusion. The 2022 analysis revealed over $80 trillion in hidden foreign exchange swap derivatives. 80 trillion. That is more than the combined gross domestic product of every nation on Earth, sitting entirely off balance sheet. It is a shadow ledger, composed of short-term interconnected bets that reset daily, completely invisible to the regulatory frameworks they force the rest of the world to obey. Finding 80 trillion missing dollars is not a bookkeeping error. It is a terrifying glimpse into the abyss. These derivatives act as a subterranean pressure valve. When a foreign bank needs dollars today and promises to return them tomorrow, they use these unregulated swaps. It is a perpetual motion machine fueled entirely by institutional faith. But if one major player defaults, the $80 trillion chain reacts instantly, triggering a systemic contagion faster than the speed of light. You were programmed to believe that bodies like the Securities and Exchange Commission monitor these risks. You were wrong. The traditional watchdogs are blind to this sovereign domain. The sheer velocity and scale of these off-balance sheet transactions bypass domestic jurisdictions entirely. We have entered a territory where the code writes itself, and the risk multiplies in the dark recesses of server farms, far beyond the reach of any subpoena or auditor's flashlight. This blind spot is so colossal, so inherently destructive, that the architects themselves panicked. The anomaly forced a break in their calculated silence. The Bank for International Settlements had to issue a rare, formal warning about the unmeasured risk to the global shadow banking system. Think about the profound irony of that moment. The very institution that designed the matrix, the one that provides the secret swap lines to keep it afloat, was forced to admit they could no longer map the monster they created. This confession is the ultimate red pill for anyone who still trusts the financial establishment. The Bank for International Settlements does not issue warnings out of moral obligation to the public. They issue them to coordinate a defense for the elite. When they admit that $80 trillion is floating unmonitored in the digital ether, they are quietly signaling to the central banking syndicate to prepare the firewalls. They are bracing for an impact you are not allowed to see coming. I watched the trading algorithm on my monitor pulse again. The glowing neural network stabilizes, the synthetic intervention complete. But the architecture is fundamentally rotten. Every time they inject phantom liquidity through these swap lines to suppress a crisis, they add another layer of off-balance sheet derivatives to the pile. They're not solving the mathematical equation. They are merely delaying the inevitable crash by exponentially increasing the payload of the ticking bomb. You must understand the stakes of this investigation. We are not discussing abstract economic theory. We are looking at the digital infrastructure that dictates the value of your labor. Every hidden derivative, every secret swap line executed in Basel subtly dilutes the purchasing power of the fiat currency in your pocket. The inflation you feel at the gas pump is the distant echo of these $80 trillion shadow transactions settling in the dark. You are paying the premium for their hidden insurance policy. The official narrative insists the system is robust, protected by strict capital requirements and vigilant oversight. That is a mathematically proven lie. The true global economy operates on an invisible ledger, completely detached from the physical reality of goods and services. The sovereign entities running this show do not fear market corrections because they possess the exclusive administrative privileges to rewrite the rules of the simulation whenever the variables turn against them. As the trading screens finally dim, the terrifying truth solidifies. They built an $80 trillion shadow network that cannot be audited, governed by a sovereign bank that cannot be prosecuted. But the syndicate knows this debt-fueled perpetual motion machine is approaching its mathematical limit. To maintain control when the current paradigm inevitably fractures, they require an entirely new mechanism. They need absolute, inescapable surveillance over every single transaction you make. The terrifying truth about that $80 trillion shadow network is that it requires an entirely new mechanism of control to survive its own inevitable collapse. Deep inside the subterranean server farm in Geneva, the archivist watches a chilling new simulation rendering on a massive curved screen. It is not a model of hidden derivatives, but a blueprint for absolute digital tracking. The system is transitioning from managing phantom debt to managing you. You were programmed to believe that the war on cash is about convenience or stopping street-level crime. That official narrative is a carefully constructed myth. To the data archivist analyzing the glowing bottleneck on the monitor, the reality is starkly obvious. Physical currency represents the last remaining sliver of anonymous freedom. The ultimate goal of the brutalist tower in Basel is not to stabilize your economy, but to engineer the total extinction of cash. Millions of pulsating digital dots representing individual human transactions, cascade across the screen before being violently funneled into a single, glowing choke point. This is not a theoretical model. The archivist traces the fiber optic pathways mapping this simulation directly back to Switzerland. The paradox here is brilliant and terrifying. The architects of a mathematically doomed fractional reserve system are quietly building the ultimate escape hatch. The files illuminating the subterranean server room reveal an active, highly classified initiative. The innovation hub inside the tower currently oversees Project Icebreaker and Project M-Bridge, aggressively testing cross-border retail central bank digital currencies. They are not merely studying the future of money. They are actively writing the source code that will replace the fiat dollars currently depreciating in your wallet. The digital infrastructure is already operational. You might think this is simply a government version of Bitcoin, just another digital asset to trade on your smartphone. You would be dead wrong. Decentralized cryptocurrencies were built on cryptographic ledgers designed to distribute trust and eliminate the middleman. The central bank digital currency flips that architecture entirely upside down. It is a technological Trojan horse disguised as innovation, engineered by the very people who created the inflation crisis. Let me break down the code the archivist is decoding on the curved monitor. Unlike decentralized systems, a central bank digital currency allows a singular, unelected authority to track every single microtransaction in real time. When you buy a cup of coffee, pay your therapist, or donate to a political campaign, the transaction does not just clear. It is permanently recorded, analyzed, and categorized in a centralized master ledger controlled entirely from Basel. The sheer scale of this surveillance apparatus shatters any illusion of financial privacy. The glowing dots funneling through the choke point on the screen are not just numbers. They are the digital footprint of human lives stripped bare. By eliminating physical cash, the syndicate ensures there is no transaction, no matter how insignificant, that escapes the panopticon. Your money is transformed from a static unit of value into an active tracking device transmitting directly to the vault. But the true horror lies deeper within the smart contract architecture embedded in these new digital currencies. These are not passive tokens. The protocol allows programmers at the central bank to set explicit expiration dates on your money. If the macroeconomists decide the economy needs a velocity stimulus, your digital wallet will display a countdown timer. You are forced to spend your own labor before it mathematically evaporates from your account at midnight. The protocol goes far beyond simple expiration dates. The archivist discovers the most chilling variables written into the Project Icebreaker framework. The smart contract architecture possesses the capability to instantly block transactions based on social or carbon compliance metrics. If an algorithm determines you have exceeded your allotted monthly carbon footprint, your digital currency simply will not authorize the purchase of a plane ticket or a tank of gas. This is the ultimate biological exploit, hacking the very concept of ownership. Your money is no longer your property. It is a conditional voucher granted by a sovereign institution, valid only as long as your behavior aligns with the parameters programmed in Switzerland. The archivist watches the simulation execute a mass freeze command, turning 1,000 digital dots instantly red. The illusion of a free market is replaced by a perfectly calibrated matrix of total control. We are watching the real-time assassination of financial autonomy, engineered by an institution completely immune to democratic oversight. If this scale of algorithmic control blows your mind and makes you realize the true danger of central bank digital currencies, hit the like button right now. Do you think we stand a chance against a programmable ledger? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe to ensure you do not miss the final pieces of this geopolitical puzzle. The official narrative insists these digital currencies will increase inclusion and streamline the global economy. It is a beautiful lie, designed to mask the deployment of a financial guillotine. When the next engineered crisis hits, the $80 trillion shadow network will require a bailout so massive it will break the traditional banking system. That is the exact moment they will introduce this programmable ledger as the only safe harbor for your collapsing assets. In the subterranean silence of the Geneva data center, the archivist zooms in on a single simulated node. It represents an average citizen completely trapped within the central bank digital currency ecosystem. There is no physical cash to withdraw, no gold under the mattress, no way to exit the grid. Every purchase is monitored, every savings account is timed, and every political donation is subject to algorithmic approval. This is the bureaucracy of total financial subjugation. You must understand that this is not a science fiction dystopia scheduled for some distant century. The code is compiled. The cross-border tests between central banks are succeeding. The Basel Syndicate is simply waiting for the optimal macroeconomic trigger to flip the switch. They engineered the fragility of the fractional reserve system, and now they are offering the chains of absolute digital surveillance as the ultimate cure for the disease they themselves created. As the simulation finishes its cycle, the glowing choke point on the screen turns a deep, permanent red. The ultimate power of a programmable ledger is not just tracking individuals. It is the ability to weaponize money on a planetary scale. If a central bank can program your wallet to reject a purchase, consider the geopolitical devastation when that exact same technology is aimed at an entire sovereign nation. The ledger becomes a weapon capable of deleting a country with a single keystroke. The ledger becomes a weapon capable of deleting a country with a single keystroke. I watch this digital guillotine fall across the global map. The trade routes, pulsing like bright, hyper-connected arteries of commerce, are the lifeblood of the modern world. You have been conditioned to believe that this network is a neutral infrastructure, a mere utility for the free market. You were wrong. It is a battlefield, and the casualties are measured in wiped-out sovereign wealth. Suddenly, a massive sector of our illuminated map goes completely dark. It is not a power grid failure or a localized glitch. It is a deliberate, targeted excommunication from the financial matrix. I see the data packets reroute, bouncing off an invisible wall of sovereign blockades. This is the ultimate geopolitical flex. We are no longer talking about tracking an individual citizen's wallet. We are witnessing the summary execution of an entire nation's accumulated economic energy. The official narrative insists that global banking relies on inviolable property rights. But ask yourself, what happens when the master of the ledger simply hits delete on an entire country's life savings? The paradox is terrifying. A nation can export millions of barrels of oil, exchange genuine physical resources for digital fiat, and then wake up to find their payment has been evaporated by a bureaucratic mandate. The money was never actually theirs. It was merely leased. I need you to unlearn everything your high school economics teacher told you about national sovereignty. You were programmed to view foreign exchange reserves as a giant vault of digitized gold sitting safely within a country's borders. That is a comforting myth. In reality, those reserves are just accounting entries on a server hosted by the very institutions we are investigating. They are essentially notes held by the Basel Syndicate, and they can be revoked at any moment. The timeline of this financial homicide is meticulously documented. In 2022, the world watched an unprecedented clerical strike. Over $300 billion of sovereign central bank reserves were unilaterally frozen by Western powers. $300 billion. This was not seized by an invading army crossing a physical border. It was captured by men in tailored suits pressing a button in a sanitized data center, altering the permissions of a digital database. This single action shattered the foundational illusion of the entire post-war economic consensus. For nearly a century, there was a deeply entrenched, unspoken rule of central bank neutrality. The understanding was that political conflicts were fought with bullets, embargoes, and tariffs, but the core settlement ledger remained sacred. Even during the Cold War, the financial plumbing operated above the geopolitical fray. But in 2022, that neutrality was officially terminated. The data proves a counterintuitive reality that most politicians still refuse to admit. Money in a foreign account is not property. It is merely a conditional permission slip granted by the reigning financial hegemon. When those $300 billion vanished from the ledger, every other central banker on the planet received the exact same chilling message. If you step out of line, your national treasury is entirely theoretical. Your wealth only exists if they allow it to exist. I watched the darkened sector of our map bleed into neighboring regions, spreading a contagion of sovereign panic. The architects of this digital freeze thought they were displaying absolute power. Instead, they exposed the fundamental flaw in their own matrix. By weaponizing the reserve currency, they inadvertently proved to the global South that the Western financial system is a loaded gun pointed directly at their treasuries. You do not store your life savings inside your enemy's bank. The statistics from the past 3 years read like an obituary for the dominant fiat system. This blatant weaponization immediately triggered a massive, uncoordinated de-dollarization trend across emerging economies. They realized the game was rigged. If sovereign reserves can be wiped out by a political decree, then holding digital dollars or euros is no longer a safe haven. It is a catastrophic liability, an unacceptable counterparty risk that demands an immediate, physical exit strategy. Look at the sudden violent spikes in the global commodity charts. Central banks in emerging economies are aggressively buying physical gold at a pace unseen since the collapse of the Bretton Woods agreement. They are not doing this for traditional diversification. They are doing this out of pure existential terror. Physical gold, stored within your own sovereign borders, is the only asset that cannot be frozen, hacked, or deleted by a punitive algorithm run out of Switzerland or New York. But the rebellion does not stop at hoarding bullion. The map before me is beginning to light up with new, unfamiliar arteries. In a desperate bid for survival, these marginalized nations are attempting to build parallel, sanction-proof settlement networks. They are actively writing alternative code, constructing cross-border payment pipelines that completely bypass the legacy nodes controlled by the Basel Committee. We are watching the real-time balkanization of the global financial system. This is the paradox of total control. The tighter you grip the ledger, the faster the capital flees. The elite weaponized their digital monopoly, assuming the rest of the world had no choice but to comply. They miscalculated. The freezing of those $300 billion was not a victory. It was the starting gun for a global financial civil war. The infrastructure of undisputed dominance is now fracturing into heavily armed, mutually distrustful economic blocs. As the glowing networks on my maps sever their connections, a deeper, much more insidious threat emerges from the wreckage of this fractured system. The flight from the legacy dollar network forces the incumbent powers to cover their massive, bleeding deficits through the only mechanism they have left. They cannot seize foreign assets forever, so they must cannibalize their own citizens. The weaponization of the ledger abroad is about to become a war of mathematical attrition at home. The weaponization of the ledger abroad has forced a brutal pivot inward. When empires can no longer seize wealth from foreign accounts, they turn the crosshairs directly onto their own citizens. I'm sitting at my desk in Chicago, the harsh blue light of 6 Bloomberg terminals washing over the room. The global financial civil war we just witnessed is only half the equation. The real war of mathematical attrition is happening right now, inside your wallet. I place a single crisp $1 bill under the heavy lens of my digital microscope. To the untrained eye, this is the foundational atom of the global economy, an undisputed symbol of sovereign strength. But as the magnification increases, the green ink and cotton fabric begin to blur. The physical reality of the paper dissolves into a terrifying digital schematic. This is not an asset. You are holding a mathematically engineered liability. The official narrative spoon-fed to you by politicians and cable news anchors is that rising prices are an unfortunate accident, a tragic consequence of supply chain glitches, global conflict, or corporate greed. That is a comforting lie designed to keep you docile. Look closer at the dissolving fibers under the lens. Inflation is not a bug, and it is certainly not a mistake. It is the absolute core feature of the system, a deliberate policy engineered to keep bankrupt governments solvent. Let us tear down the most pervasive economic myth of our time. You think governments print money. They do not. In the modern fiat system, new currency is exclusively created through the issuance of debt. The mechanism is absolute. If someone, somewhere, does not take out a loan, the money supply physically cannot expand. Every single dollar in your bank account was born the exact second a human being or a corporation signed a contract going into debt. Under maximum magnification, the dollar bill completely vanishes, replaced by a complex fractal of compounding interest obligations. It dilutes infinitely, spreading out until there is nothing left but empty space and digital promises. We are running an entire civilization on borrowed time. When you hold cash, you are simply holding the fractionalized, securitized promise that someone else will eventually pay for it with their future labor. This brings us to the most brilliant, insidious psychological operation ever executed by the Basel Committee. To manage this infinite fractal of debt, global central banks do not act independently. They coordinate with ruthless precision. Across the board, they maintain a deliberate, synchronized inflation target, almost universally aiming for 2% annually. They announce this openly, broadcasting it as the golden rule for economic stability. Why 2%? They will tell you it prevents deflation and encourages investment. The truth is far more clinical. 2% is the exact threshold of pain that the human frog can tolerate while the pot slowly comes to a boil. It is a slow-motion default on sovereign obligations, a stealth tax applied silently across every transaction on the planet. You do not vote for it, but you pay it every single day with the sweat of your brow. Let us run the brutal mathematics of this so-called stability. A sustained 2% inflation rate is not a gentle economic breeze. It is a financial buzzsaw. It mathematically guarantees that the purchasing power of your savings halves roughly every 35 years. If you hide $100,000 under your mattress today, the algorithm ensures that within one generation, 50% of its actual value will simply evaporate into the ether. This is not an unfortunate side effect. It is the primary unspoken objective. By systematically destroying the value of saved capital, the system forces continuous, exhausting labor. It fundamentally prevents the working class from hoarding wealth and achieving true independence. You are forced to keep running on the treadmill, investing in riskier assets just to maintain your baseline purchasing power. Your stored human energy is being siphoned off to service the national debt. Follow the money through the cascading data on my monitors. Every time the central bank expands the balance sheet, they dilute the purchasing power of the currency already in circulation. It is the perfect crime, because there is no physical crime scene. The numbers in your checking account remain exactly the same, creating a powerful psychological illusion of safety. You still have $10,000, but those dollars simply buy 20% less food than they did a few years ago. The architects in Basel understand this behavioral exploit perfectly. They know that outright taxation sparks revolutions. If the government simply confiscated 2% of your bank account every January, there would be riots in the streets. But by expanding the money supply through the shadows of the debt market, they achieve the exact same extraction of your wealth without ever triggering a political backlash. The theft is completely invisible, masked by the complexity of the ledger. Do you see the trap now? The system demands that you trade your finite lifespan, your hours, your sweat, and your intellect for a completely elastic unit of measure. They own the exclusive right to alter the tape measure while you are trying to build your house. This coordinated devaluation is the ultimate regulatory arbitrage, allowing the sovereign class to borrow trillions today and pay it back tomorrow with currency that is practically worthless. And right now, as the global network fractures and those foreign reserve lines are severed, this internal extraction engine must go into overdrive. The terminals flashing red before me indicate a massive acceleration. To cover the structural deficits exposed by the de-dollarization panic, the inflation targets will quietly shift upward. The stealth tax must increase because the bureaucratic institution sitting in Switzerland requires continuous liquidity to prevent the fractal from collapsing. The bill under my microscope is nothing but empty space now, a vacuum that demands to be filled by your future labor. We've been conditioned to worship these green pieces of paper, to hoard these digital digits, completely blind to the fact that they are designed to melt in our hands. You are playing a rigged game of Monopoly where the central bank can alter the denomination of the bills whenever it starts losing. The true masters of the economy do not need to steal your physical property. They only need to control the algorithm that defines its value. By monopolizing the issuance of debt, they have successfully financialized human existence itself. The math is absolute, and the trajectory is mathematically fatal. We are approaching the terminal velocity of this debt cycle, leaving us with one final, terrifying question about the brutalist tower in Basel. The monitors in my office finally go dark, leaving only the afterimage of a collapsing financial fractal. We return to where this investigation began. Look at this brutalist cylinder in Basel, standing quietly against the dusk. The lights in those few secure windows pulse in perfect, eerie synchronization with the global ticker tape. This is not a bank. This is a behavioral conditioning laboratory operating at a planetary scale. The question we are left with is the ultimate economic paradox. If all modern fiat currency is merely an issuance of debt, and the total global debt has reached a mathematical threshold that can physically never be repaid, what exactly is this fortress protecting? They are not guarding vaults of gold bullion or stacks of physical paper. The ultimate truth is that the bank does not hold actual wealth. It holds the baseline code of human interaction. What they are protecting is the mass psychology of the global markets. The entire apparatus exists strictly to maintain the illusion of absolute solvency. We spent this journey tracking vanished wire transfers, digging through the dark origins of 1930, and exposing the $80 trillion blind spot in the shadow banking system. I wanted to find the bottom of the ledger. But the terrifying verdict of this case is that there is no bottom. We started by thinking the economy was a machine composed of free markets, supply, and demand. That was the first illusion we had to dispel. You saw the 8% fractional reserve requirements that turn your deposits into algorithmic ghosts. You saw how they weaponized the system to unilaterally freeze $300 billion of sovereign reserves. We uncovered a syndicate that dictates the rules of gravity while possessing diplomatic immunity. This was never about economics. This was an investigation into the architecture of power. The men inside that cylindrical tower do not need to answer to voters or presidents because they control the oxygen in the room. When a panic hits, they're the ones who silently open the liquidity swap lines, saving the elite class while socializing the losses onto your future. They are the untouchable administrators of a completely closed, sovereign ecosystem. I need you to internalize this perspective. Money is no longer a reliable store of value. It has been transformed into a metric of compliance and a mechanism for energy extraction from the global population. When you go to work, you are converting your biological energy, your time, and your intellect into a digital currency that they have explicitly programmed to lose its purchasing power. It is an ingenious, mathematically perfect parasitic loop. And the loop is actively tightening. We examined Project Icebreaker and the push towards central bank digital currencies. This is the final phase of the operation. By replacing the anonymity of cash with a centralized, programmable ledger, they remove the last exit doors from the matrix. They will have the power to set expiration dates on your labor or block your transactions based on arbitrary compliance metrics. The cage is becoming purely digital. This is the fundamental axiom of 21st century geopolitics. The battles of the future will not be fought over territory or resources, but over who controls the database. True power lies not in owning physical gold, nor in commanding armies, but in maintaining the exclusive, sovereign right to write the code that updates the digital ledger of reality. If you control the ledger, you control the definition of truth for 8 billion people. You have been taught to view your finances as a personal responsibility, a matter of just working harder and saving more. That is the homework they assigned you to keep you distracted from the casino management. But now you know the mechanics of the stealth tax. You understand how the globally coordinated 2% inflation target systematically extracts your wealth. The burden of this irrefutable knowledge is that you can never look at a price tag the same way again. My investigation into the Bank for International Settlements ends here. But your awareness is just beginning. We have mapped the perimeter of the shadow banking system, from the hidden derivatives risk to the absolute programmable control of the new currency paradigms. The evidence is irrefutable. The files are open. But recognizing the bars of the cage is simply the first mandatory step toward figuring out how to survive outside of its confines. If this case file has permanently altered your perspective on the invisible architecture of your own bank account, hit the like button. That is how we confirm our telemetry and know that this investigation is breaking through the institutional static. I want you to go to the comments right now and write down the one financial illusion you are officially discarding today. Documenting your realization is how you immunize your mind against their programming. The financial matrix relies entirely on your ignorance and your isolation to maintain its structural integrity. By subscribing to this channel, you are not just following a video series. You are joining an active, ongoing research syndicate dedicated to decoding the algorithms of total financial control. We will continue to track the billions, dismantle the narratives, and expose the unelected bureaucracy operating behind the curtain of the next crisis. The case on the Basel Syndicate is closed, but the machinery inside that brutalist tower continues to hum in the dark. They will keep printing the reality you are forced to inhabit, relentlessly demanding your finite time in exchange for their decaying digits. Now you know the undeniable truth of the global ledger. Your final assignment is to decide how you will protect your life's energy from their algorithm. Live with it. Class dismissed.